Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 371 for the 4th of Kislev in a leap year. So imagine you met a person who never ate chocolate before in their lives, and you love chocolate, let's say. And so imagine that you told them about your love of chocolate, and they said, "Wow, that's so interesting. I've never had chocolate. What does it taste like?" What would you say? Would you be able to accurately describe the taste of chocolate to them? I mean, first of all, there are lots of different types of chocolate. Some are more bitter, some are more sweet, some are more pungent, some are like softer in texture, some are have a more like grainy kind of texture. But regardless, no matter how you describe this chocolate, no matter how much this person read up on chocolate, would they ever really be able to experience chocolate without actually tasting it? No, right? We all know this. So truthfully, this is the same thing with anything in life. And as we'll learn today, this is true, especially for God, for godliness. So interestingly, just the other day, I got into a philosophical conversation with this guy who grew up religious and is no longer religious anymore. And although he's no longer religious, he's still very much kind of troubled and seeking the truth. And he's one of these people who did not leave Judaism just because he, wanted to go and party or whatever it is, or because some rabbi was like really mean to him or something like that. In fact, he doesn't necessarily have like negative feelings towards Judaism and things like that, but it's more like it's coming from an intellectual place, and it's coming from a place of frustration that there were certain questions that kind of he felt like he never really got satisfactory answers to on an intellectual level. And he asked me at one point, he said, "How do you know what's real? How do you know what's true?" And I thought this was an interesting question, and it led into a deeper conversation, which I was going to get into in the podcast. And then I was thinking, I don't know how practical and how relevant it is to today's podcast. But I think what's more interesting about it, and what does relate to what we're going to be uncovering today, is the question and the fact that this guy, who is such an intellectual person, this is his modus operandi. This is his home, is his intellect. This is where he feels comfortable, and this is where he tends to gauge what is truth and what is not truth. But as we'll learn today, the intellect, as great as it is, and it really definitely does have a lot of advantages in terms of truth seeking over, let's say, the senses or the emotions or things like that, it's still very much limited, and it can still only take us so far. And yes, if you want to, find truth using your intellect alone, you're going to get stuck. Even in Chassidus, I get this experience sometimes. It's like you're learning Chassidus, you're learning all these deep ideas, but then there's always another question and going deeper and deeper and deeper, and you never quite get to the end because you can't, because intellectually it's impossible, because truly God is beyond intellectual grasp. And all we could do in learning Chassidus is to talk about what God is not, to talk about, in the null hypothesis, like we were talking about yesterday. Like God is this is kind of what we know, the existence of God. Like we're talking about the chocolate. When a person reads a book all about chocolate and they've never eaten chocolate before, they can get a sense of, okay, this is what chocolate looks like. This is like, I could kind of imagine in my mind what the chocolate tastes like, but it's not really chocolate. It's not. And there has to be that awareness of that. And so that's what we're going to be learning about today. And the kind of remedy for this, the kind of solution to this quandary is, just like in the taste of chocolate, to actually go and eat the chocolate, to actually go and do the mitzvahs, to actually go and do God's will, which is very physical in nature. So interestingly, This might seem really strange. Like, how is it that the way that we connect to God in this lofty way is through physicality? But as we'll learn, there's something about physicality specifically in which due to its limited nature, due to the nature of what it is, that actually is where God invested his godliness, his essence in a certain sense, in a way that is undiluted, in a way that is not found in intellectual pursuits or even in emotional pursuits of God. So as per the style as of late in the Tanya, it's going to get quite Kabbalistic, but I'll try to keep it as down to earth as possible. So just bear with that. And for context, we're still in the middle of Kuntres Acharon, the fourth essay, which is this longer essay, discussing the different ways that we connect to God, whether it's through prayer, whether it's through Torah study, and whether it's through mitzvahs, and the advantage that each one has and what each one accomplishes and how this happens on a Kabbalistic level. So yesterday we were discussing the idea of emulating God in a kind of like in terms of God's attributes, being a nice person, being a kind person, being a person of compassion, rahmanis, and all of that kind of stuff. And we talked about how, while this is definitely something we should do, this is definitely something we should emulate, we also need to be aware of the limitations of this, and how when we are emulating God in these ways, we shouldn't get a God complex. We shouldn't think that we are God or that we're anywhere near to God actually. And we should really think about it more in a humble way, like sort of like that we're getting like a semblance of God. It's sort of like a very small like measure of God, and likened to the way that Avraham Avinu likened himself to being like dusts and ashes. So just like the dust and ashes of a tree, which contain within them the essence of a tree in a certain sense. On the other hand, it's extremely diluted. It's an extremely diluted form of the tree. And so too, Avraham Avinu epitomized the trait of chesed within God. Then, nevertheless, his level of chesed was really just like the dust of the tree. Like it is a really very diluted form of the chesed of God. But so now today we're going to learn about the difference when it comes to mitzvahs, and how mitzvahs are not this diluted form of godliness, but in fact they're called maaseh Elokim hema. They're called the works of God himself. And what we'll learn what this means is that there's something about mitzvahs that are much more essential and not just and undiluted in the way other things are. So the way this works is that the origin of the mitzvahs is that they come from the vessels of Atzilus. And to be specific, they come from the outer vessels of Chassidus. So just a little brief outline is that within each one of the worlds, there are vessels, and the vessels correspond to the lights. So the vessels, the lights, these are the spheros. So we know that there are 10 spheros, so then there are 10 vessels. But the vessels also, if you think about a vessel, like think about a cup, for example, there's the outer part of the cup, there's the inner part of the cup, like, where the water actually goes in, and then there's the middle layer of the cup, like the intermediary space between the outer and the inner parts of the cup. So too, when it comes to the vessels, to the kelim, all the 10 vessels in each of the 4 worlds there are outer vessels, there are inner vessels, and then there are middle vessels. So when it comes to the mitzvahs, again, getting kind of technical here, the source of the mitzvahs is from the outer layer of the vessels of Atzilus, of the world of Atzilus. And these external vessels of Atzilus get drawn down through the lower worlds, through Bria, Yitzhira, and Asiyah, into the practical mitzvahs that we do. So, for example, the Alter Rebbe gives an example. For example, the mitzvah of esrog, right? So that we on Sukkot we hold an esrog and a lulav, and so it's called the esrog and its minim, the 4 minim. So within that esrog, it looks like just like a little lemon, right? However, within that esrog is vested an aspect of the essence of the chesed of Zer Anpin, meaning to say, the external aspect of this chesed of Zer Anpin. Okay, so just to understand that for a second, so we're saying again that all the mitzvahs come from the external vessels of Atzilus, and so each one in its very particular way in terms of each, there's different vessels. There's the vessel of chesed, there's the vessel of Gvura, Tiferes, all that stuff. So, for example, when it comes to Lulav and Esrog, the mitzvah of Lulav and Esrog, this is stemming from the external vessel of chesed of Atzilus. And so what's important to recognize about this, basically, and the Ultra will get into this deeper, is that the world of Atzilus, as we've mentioned, is very different than the other worlds. The world of Atzilus is the world of emanation. So it's unified with God, which means that even the vessels, even the external vessels that are found within the world of Atzilus are really unified and one with God. And there isn't this barrier that we find in the other worlds. There isn't this dilution that we find in the other worlds. So by contrast, where do we find this more diluted form is when it comes to man, when it comes to a person. So even a person who some people are very, very holy and they have a soul that comes from Atzilus, right? Nevertheless, since that lofty soul becomes vested within a body, within a physical body, which is not a vessel of Atzilus, it's a vessel of this world, it's a physical body of this world, then this type of person will not ever be able to grasp the essence and the inner aspect of the chasadim of the Zer Anpin of Atzilus. Like, meaning they'll never be able to grasp truly in a true way the true inner level of this chesed in Atzilus. Why not? So this is because, like, if we think about the four worlds, each one of the four worlds correspond to actually different levels of the soul. So we've mentioned this before, but for context, so we have the lowest of the four worlds is the world of Asiya, and that corresponds to the level of Nefesh. Nefesh is that animating force that vivifies our body. It's a very simple part of our body that, allows us to move and walk. It's the experiential part. Then there is the level of Yetzirah, the world of Yetzirah, and that corresponds to the Ruach level of our soul. That's the emotional component of our soul. Okay, then we have the world of Bria, which that corresponds to the Neshama level of our soul. That's the intellectual component of our soul. Then what comes above Bria? Above Bria is the world of Atzilus. So what does Atzilus correspond to? Atzilus corresponds to the level of the soul known as the Chaya. The Chaya is a level of a soul which is not found within the body. It's above the intellect. It's the supra consciousness, which is above the intellect, and it hovers. In fact, it hovers above a person. So it's not something that we can really see or that we're even conscious of necessarily. But that corresponds to the level of Atzilus, which is why we can't grasp it with our intellects, because our intellects can only connect us with our neshama level. But the level of chaya is related to Atzilus. So we cannot use, so this brings us back to even a person whose soul comes from Atzilus, because that soul is found within a physical body with a physical mind, that type of person, no matter how much they learn or study or meditate, can never grasp the level of Atzilus. They can never grasp chesed of Atzilus in a way that can be grasped when holding a lulav and esrog and performing the mitzvah of lulav and esrog while holding it. What a person could grasp with their intellect is the existence of these attributes. So just like, the person who studies about chocolate, they can learn a lot about chocolate. They can probably even teach a course about chocolate without ever having tasted a piece of chocolate in their lives, right? So they know about the existence of chocolate, but to actually know about the essence of chocolate, they can't comprehend this with their minds. So similarly here too, a person, even a very, very lofty person, cannot with their minds grasp Atzilus, grasp the attributes of Atzilus. But so now the Alter Rebbe brings up a supposed challenge to this, a seeming challenge to this idea that we see, as he's mentioned before, this idea that when we spoke about Moshe Rabbeinu, then we see that God said to Moshe Rabbeinu, Ra'ita et achorai, you saw my hinder part, which seems to be referencing the fact that even though, yes, only the external part of God that Moshe saw, nevertheless, it was the external part of God himself, which really is an allusion to this level of Atzilus, where there wasn't this barrier. It was the external level, but it was the external level of Atzilus. So how could this be if we're saying that nobody, no matter how great they are, can ever comprehend even that level within Atzilus, even if it's the outer levels, the outer kalim of Atzilus? So the Alter Rebbe says this is because he witnessed this through prophecy. So it wasn't an intellectual thing. Moshe Rabbeinu didn't experience God due to his intellect, but he experienced God through prophecy. And why? Because prophecy is actually where you divest of the physical, as is written about in Re'am Nehemna in Parshat Mishpatim. So through prophecy, Moshe Rabbeinu was actually able to transcend his mind and tap into that level of the Chaya, which corresponds to Atzilus. And so just to reiterate, the Alter Rebbe reiterates that this is, now we can understand why it is that no person can grasp God, because without understanding, you can't really grasp. It's not true grasping. We can get a sense of God's existence, but we can't actually grasp him, which is not the case when it comes, for example, to the example of esrog, as we said, that in that esrog, the vitality of that esrog actually comes from God's essence himself. How so? Because the vitality of the esrog comes from the essence of the outer kelim of nukva, of Zer Anpin in Atzilus. So that's a mouthful. So just to break that down there. So basically, we know that within all worlds, so we're focusing on the world of Atzilus now, we have the 10 spheros. And within the 10 spheros, we have something called the Zer Anpin, which the Zer Anpin are the midos, the attributes of the spheros. And that's sort of like, as we've mentioned in a previous episode, the attributes are kind of like, that's how we relate to God is with the attributes, just like you relate to a person in terms of their attributes. So now another thing to remember is that each one of the spheros has within it all the other spheros as well. So there's layers and layers within each of the spheros. So now within the level of Zer Anpin, there's Malchus. That's one of the layers within it. Malchus is the lowest of all the levels, and it's also called Nukva. Right? And so now we're found basically in Nukva or Malchus of Zer Anpin of Atzilus. Okay, now we're in that subcategory there within that world of Atzilus. And another thing that we need to remember is that each level has a light and it has a vessel. And not only does it have one vessel, but it actually has three vessels. It has the inner vessel, the outer vessel, and the intermediate vessel. So here we're talking about the outer vessel of the Nukva of Zer Anpin of Atzilus. So the outer vessel of Malchus of Zer Anpin of Atzilus. If you don't remember all those technical details, that's okay. But the main thing to take away from this is even though these are layers upon layers and all that stuff, because we're talking about the world of Atzilus, within Atzilus, everything is just an emanation. So everything really truly is God and it's not diluted. There's no dilution that happens. So yes, there's vessels and there's lights and there's levels and all that stuff, but it's not separation the way that there's separation in other kinds of worlds. So even though the esrog is coming from this level of the outer kelim of the nukva of Zer Anpin of Atzilus, even though it's this outer level, it's still godliness, it's still elokus. And the Alter Rebbe brings proof for this from the Eitz Chaim, where it's taught there that all the fruits are rooted in the world of Atzilus. So how so? So the Alter Rebbe says this is because the 30 kelim of Atzilus, the 30 vessels of Atzilus, because again, remember there's 10 energies within Atzilus, and each one has an inner, middle, and an outer layer for the vessels. So the 30, which makes 30 in total, 10 times 3 is 30. So the 30 vessels of Atzilus descended down into the lower worlds of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, which are, what is this vestment? These are the 10 sayings through which the world was created. Through them being vested, and how did these 10 sayings create the worlds? They vested these energies, these kalim, these 30 kalim within the nukva of Asiya, the malchus of Asiya, which is the essence within the essence. Meaning to say, so how does this work? Is that the vessels of Atzilus became the neshama of Asiya. And which means that the soul of our world, the soul of Asiya, is actual divinity, is actually elokus. Because when we talk about the world of Atzilus, as I mentioned, Il v'galmu echad, him and his vessels are one. The emanator and the emanated are one and the same. So thus, if we say that the vessels of Atzilus came down and became the soul of our world, this it's one and the same with God. And then next in that flow, so we have the vessel of Atzilus coming down, becoming the soul, the neshama of our world. And from that neshama of our world, then this became vested within the kalim, the vessels of this world, of the malchus of this world, of the nukva of this world. And this is how the etrog came about. This is how the physical etrog came into being. So we see that there's this chain reaction going all the way back to Atzilus. And so thus we find that when a person actually takes the lil of an esrog and shakes it according to the way that we have to on Sukkot, we're actually touching the vitality that is coming from this malchus of Atzilus itself, that is unified with the Or Ein Sof, with God himself. So that basically is giving us kind of the map, the breakdown as to why it is that when we actually do these physical mitzvahs, we are touching God's essence, which is not the case when we just are in the world of intention. So a person can have great intention while they're doing the mitzvah, but that intention is not getting them to touch that essence. even if he knows all the mystical ideas, all those mystical ideas and all those teachings about why we shake lulav and esrog and what it's all about and all that stuff, a person is grasping the existence of the mitzvah. Like they're learning about the chocolate. They're learning what the chocolate is made of and that kind of thing. But they're not grasping the mehus, the essence of God. So there's these terms that come up in Chassidus a lot: metzios and mahus, the existence and the essence. So our brains, our intentions, our feelings can get us to touch the existence of God. It can get us closer to understanding that God exists, but to actually touch God himself, that can only be done through the performance of a mitzvah, like shaking lulav and esrog. However, here's an exception to where our brains actually can get us to a place of touching God. This is through learning the halachos of esrog, learning the laws of esrog. So through learning the laws of esrog, a person is actually able to touch the mitzvah itself, because we're learning the halachos of the mitzvahs in a way of, and so thus we're attaching ourselves to the mitzvah itself through our speech and through our thought. And especially if a person learns like the esoteric dimension, the sod level, like all those deeper aspects of the mitzvah, this is another way that a person can attach to godliness itself. So we mentioned before, when a person's actually performing the mitzvah, if while they're performing the mitzvah, they're thinking about all these great intentions that they learned, yes, it's a great thing. But in that moment that they're performing the mitzvah, then it's not attaching them to the essence of God. It's only attaching them to the existence of God. But at the moment that they're actually learning these things, if they're speaking the words out loud and using their mind to try to understand these deeper ideas, they are connecting with the essence of God. So that's it for today. So once again, the takeaway from all of this is just the idea that nothing really can substitute actual practical action, actual doing mitzvahs when it comes to really grasping truth, not our emotions, not our intellects, but really we actually have to go out and do the mitzvah. Our minds and our hearts can only take us so far. So that's it for today. We still have a bit more of this essay to go, a few more days. So stick with it, and we'll continue along these lines tomorrow, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.